What would you consider a forgotten gem? Pretty much everybody would say it's a good game that became forgotten due to lack of interest, advertising, or inactive fan base because... well, that's exactly what it is. A game that was highly praised when it came out, but for one reason or another, as time went on, interest and discussion slowly dwindled away. To the point where if you brought it up in casual conversation, everyone would just look at you in confusion and say, that game doesn't sound real, you made that up. Castle of Illusion, Vib Ribbon, Ben and Ed, and Hell Pie are all games that I have a deep personal connection to, but sadly are never mentioned in any type of conversation. And when you do mention them, people think you're crazy. I mean, can you blame them? The plots of these games sound so nutty that I wouldn't believe them. Would you believe that a game where a zombie is forced to partake in a series of grotesque circus acts to save his human child friend from a mentally insane ringmaster exists? How about a game where an elephant who controls like Ramby from Donkey Kong Country gets enlisted to the military to stop an opposing force called the Phantom from invading a city called Shell City? What about a mad rat who gets killed by a scientist and convinces the rat god to revive him so he can enact revenge on the aforementioned scientist? None of these games sound real at all, which is one reason I'm so infatuated with the concept of a forgotten gem, because they can sound like the most nonsensical games ever created, but can also be the most fun video game you have ever played in your entire life. Much like the very game I'd like to tell you about today. A game about a little boy who goes to the moon, meets the daughter of the sun, and finds a pair of magic scissors. Puppeteer! Puppeteer is a PlayStation 3 exclusive developed by a Japanese studio creatively titled Japan Studio. Japan Studio is a company you may not recognize based off the very creative name, but you've definitely heard of these guys. They made the original Ape Escape, Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, and The Last Guardian, all of which I never thought I'd ever mention on my YouTube channel because I don't have a big fondness for any of them. The reason I'm going into the history of this studio is because I find it extremely interesting how they created such critically acclaimed video games, then went on to make a game that nobody seems to remember. When Puppeteer came out, people loved it. It got high review scores across the board, an 8.5 on IGN and 80 on Metacritic. People not only knew about this game, but they freaking loved it. But for whatever reason, the game kind of just faded into obscurity and now nobody remembers that it exists. Which sucks, because it is legitimately one of the most fun and unique video games I have ever played. So now I'm here to finally bring Puppeteer back into the limelight and show people how Puppeteer is the PlayStation's most forgotten gem. Puppeteer follows a little boy named Kuturo who gets kidnapped by the Moon Bear King, an all-powerful tyrant who's enslaved a majority of the moon's population. Yes, in this universe the moon is an actual planet with ecosystems, civilizations, and populace. You're just gonna have to roll with it, okay? After capturing Kuturo, the Moon Bear King asks if he would be his bestest friend in the whole wide world. Kuturo, fearing for his life, agrees, hoping the Moon Bear King would let him go. Instead, the Moon Bear King promptly calls him a liar, decapitates Kuturo, eats his head, and throws him in the dungeon. Meanwhile, the Moon Witch, Esma Potts, and her cat, Yin Yang, are scheming to steal the Moon Bear King's magical scissors to overthrow him and take back the moon. So they enlist the help of Kuturo, who luckily found a substitute head in this head pot, to steal the magic scissors, kill the Moon Bear King, and save the moon. After Kuturo steals the magic scissors, he runs into this little pixie girl named Picarina, who also got kidnapped. Kuturo then attempts to save her, but in doing so, he derails the entire mission. Chaos ensues, and he killed a giant cat, yada yada yada. All you need to know for now is that they booked it from the Moon Bear King's castle and stumbled upon the White Castle, the castle of the moon goddess. Picarina then explains if they combine all the pieces of the Moonstone, they can summon the moon goddess and get her to overthrow the Moon Bear King. So Kuturo and Picarina set off on their own to gather all the Moonstone shards, while Esma and Yin Yang hide out at the castle and come up with a way to double-cross Kuturo and steal the Moonstone shards for themselves. Now, I know that this plot sounds pretty complex and messy with the way I just described it, but it doesn't feel like this in the actual game at all. This game just has a lot of moving parts in it, and that makes it sound confusing when trying to summarize it into a couple of paragraphs without spoiling everything. With that being said, I love this game's story. I love the setting, I love the writing, I love the characters, I love how high the stakes are, I love how everything in the game is really lighthearted and goofy except for the villain. It's just all around fantastic. But before I get into that stuff, I'd like to get the actual video gamey stuff out of the way first. Puppeteer honestly feels like a fairly basic 2D platformer on the surface. Kuturo can run, jump, duck, and roll, and that's about it. Kuturo's running speed isn't very fast and he doesn't jump very far, but I don't think that's entirely a bad thing. I think having a character with a low speed and jump length will be bad in a game that isn't designed accordingly. Luckily, this game is designed around the moveset being the way it is. Like, Rascal is a 3D platformer that uses tank controls like Resident Evil, and it doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense, and it's not a good game. As opposed to Croc, who also has tank controls, but the levels are designed around the tank controls to make it work. In Rascal, they're just rooms that you run around. Puppeteer is much more of an exploration, figure-it-out kind of 2D platformer. So the slower moveset actually kind of works, because you need to take your time and explore. Kind of like the original Rayman, except not egregiously difficult. In fact, this game is kind of easy. It's not the kind of easy that gets boring or lame. It's more like the kind of easy where it's baby brain easy, but it still manages to be fun. It sounds super basic on paper, but the game manages to make really fun levels and set pieces despite the super simple mechanics. What truly makes the gameplay shine, though, is the magic scissors themselves, Calibris. You can use Calibris to cut through certain obstacles, kill enemies, and fly through the air while cutting floating objects. Calibris is honestly a lot of fun to use. Like, just the way it controls, it's really satisfying. At first, controlling Calibris will take a little getting used to because it is slow, but right when that starts to feel a little annoying, you unlock the dash ability for Calibris. If you press square rapidly rather than rhythmically, Calibris cuts and moves really slowly, but if you cut rhythmically rather than rapidly, Calibris gets a big fat speed boost while cutting, but it only shoots in a straight line, so it does sacrifice some mobility. So now it's sort of a balancing act. Do I want to use the speed boost to cut through all these obstacles really quickly and get to my destination faster but lose control and risk getting hit, or do I take my time, cut slowly, and have full control over Calibris? I think it's really fun. On top of Calibris, throughout the game, Kuduro will find the heads of the 4 champions of the moon: the Moon Knight, the Moon Ninja, the Moon Pirate, and the Moon Wrestler. I dare you to count how many times I say the word moon in this video. These powers are all quite a lot of fun to use. Each one gives you a new ability for Kuduro, like the Moon Knight, which gives you the ability to shield attacks from enemies. You can even use it to deflect the laser attacks from these flower dudes. This is really satisfying to do. The sound of the laser plonking off your shield and bouncing back off the flower while you play tennis and slowly drain the health of the flower, it's great. Once again, a super simple mechanic that manages to be really fun to use. Though, if this one seems a little too simple, the next one you get is a lot more versatile. The Moon Ninja is probably the one you'll be using for a majority of the game. It allows you to throw bombs. You can throw them straight ahead of you, you can throw them in an arc, you can plop them down right underneath you like you're laying an egg. The game makes sure you know how to use this because you use it a lot. You'll use it to open pathways, kill enemies, solve puzzles, and light candles constantly. It's really satisfying to throw this into the mouth of a flower or frog or whatever you're throwing it into. It does have physics, so if you miss, it'll still probably bounce in, but I try my best to swish it in there without hitting the rim. It's just too much fun. The next 2 heads are honestly pretty situational, so I kind of forgot about them until the game shoved it into my face whenever I needed to use them, but they're still pretty fun. The Moon Pirate allows you to grapple onto things. That's about it. A lot less versatile than the Moon Knight and Ninja, but it's still fun to use. You just press the button when the game tells you to, then things happen. It's not very difficult. It can sometimes be fun because they'll force you to try and pull on something midway through a boss fight while also dodging attacks, but that's about the only time that ability is ever fun to use. The last one you get is the Wrestler. The Wrestler allows you to move heavy objects and ground pound, which is fun to use because, I mean, who doesn't love a good ground pound? But the only time it's ever useful is when the bull icon is painted on the thing you gotta smash or move. As you've probably noticed so far, this game has a theme of head. And that's because heads are the primary collectible aside from the moonstone pieces. These heads are pretty fun to collect. There are some story-specific heads that are required to beat the game, like the aforementioned champion heads, but a majority of them are hidden away in the background pretty well. And you gotta use this stupid cursor thing to grab it. But that's about all the cursor is good for, so don't worry, it's not another Mario Galaxy situation here. The heads you collect also function as your health bar. You can pocket 3 heads at a time, and if you get hit, it falls off. You can catch it if you're fast enough, but if you don't, it goes away, and Kuduro puts the next head on. Run out of all 3 heads, and then you die. It's just the typical 3 hit point system that literally every game ever uses, but it puts a nice little spin on it because if you find a head you think looks cool, you're gonna work your hardest to keep it on for as long as you want, unless you just don't care and sprint through everything and grab the next head you find. My personal favorites are probably the banana or the pistol. They look really funny. I like how the mouth of the pistol is just the barrel. The other collectibles are fairly self-explanatory. There's the Moonstone Shards, which basically function as this game's coins. Then there's the Moonstone Pieces, which function as stars. You get them after boss fights, and you have to collect a certain amount of them to beat the game. The level design of this game is pretty on point. It is pretty linear. I mean, it is a 2D platformer after all. Your main primary goal is to just get to the end of the level, but there are tons of nooks and crannies to find secret heads or Moonstone Shards. Despite the simplicity of it, the game manages to have a lot of varied level designs. Like, instead of only ever running to the right, sometimes you'll be going to the left, or maybe up. And on top of that, there are also levels that switch up the gameplay quite a bit. Now, I don't mean like random kart racer or third-person shooter or turret segment. I mean like you're still platforming, it's just you're platforming differently. There are some levels where you're using these zipper things that you ride along with Calibris, and you go really fast and you gotta cut through and jump over obstacles while switching paths on the fly. There are also levels where you ride something, whether that be a horse or a mouse or a UFO. The vehicle goes on its own, all you gotta do is jump and duck. These are actually probably my favorite part of the game. It was legitimately so much fun to memorize the layouts of these levels and try to get through without getting hit a single time. Another thing that's pretty fantastic and varied are the boss fights. This game has a lot of boss fights. There's a whopping 13 boss fights in this game, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's only split into 7 chapters with 3 acts per chapter. So, I mean, that's like a boss fight on average every other level. I don't know if that math is correct. I just made that up on the spot. I'm not going to go into all of them because that just ruins the fun of figuring them out on your own, but I will mention some of my favorites. There's this giant pumpkin dude, and you go inside of his mouth and brutally remove all of his rotten and decayed teeth without any anesthetic. There's General Dragon, which has you chasing him into the sky, literally tearing him to pieces as he throws fireballs and enemies at you until you tear him limb from limb so he falls from the sky and lands in an active volcano.
Seriously just cut off my tail? Tell me you didn't just cut off my tail!
And lastly, there's my personal top favorite, General Horse, whose first phase has you racing a train while you're on a horse, and periodically throughout the race, you jump off of your horse onto the train, sabotage the train to make it slower, and jump back onto the horse just to win the race by completely legitimate means. Then, phase 2 has you going mano-a-mano with the engine of the train as the engine starts breathing fire and shooting missiles at you. This game is nuts! The only boss fight that isn't all that great is General Dog, because he quite literally is exactly the same as General Tiger, the first boss in the game. I guess it is kind of fitting how underwhelming Dog's boss fight is, because he's kind of the laughingstock of all of the Moon Bear King's generals. But even if that was the intention, just because it was done on purpose doesn't mean it was a good idea. He does have a rad design though. I kind of wish he was a cooler character because he's really cool looking. So that's the gameplay covered. Now it's time to get into the extra goodie bits on top. Writing, soundtrack, graphics, and all that jazz. And I will be talking about them in that order because I randomly decided to do so for no particular reason at all. The writing in this game is fantastic, which is always a good thing, but here in particular, it's really appreciated because the characters do not shut up. Most people would find this very annoying, and for very understandable reasons, but I personally love it. I really like it when characters have little bits of banter while I play. In any game, it makes the whole experience feel more lively, you know? Like if you went on an adventure with some friends, you wouldn't be silent the whole time, you'd be cracking jokes. This game does this often, and it works mostly every time. I especially love it when characters start bickering and fighting with the narrator. Oh yeah, I forgot. The narrator in this game is like an actual character with a personality, goals, aspirations, and interests. He's especially into planes, as he expresses in one of the final levels of the game.
It's back! The MBK-21 Lunar Striker, aka the Bear Striker.
I don't think I'd go as far to say it's anywhere near the funniest game I've ever played, but it's pretty high up there. Games like Journey to the Savage Planet and Portal 2 are much funnier, but this game did manage to make me laugh quite a bit. The only part of the writing I thought got kinda annoying was just all of Picarina's dialogue. She's the typical, I'm not like other girls archetype, but I mean, it works sometimes, but sometimes it can just get really irritating. No hate to the voice actress, but there are points where she'll start complaining about inconveniences in the story, but it just keeps going and going and going and never stops. Like, this woman just won't shut up! Like, I get it, they're trying to be cute, like, oh no, this level's so long, I just wish it was shorter, but I know it's a long level, you don't need to scream that in my ear and tell me that! It was funny for like the first couple of times that it happened, but it just kept going and it never stopped. Anyway, other than that, the writing is pretty great. One thing that's phenomenal and has no hiccups is the soundtrack. I about said laugh track. The soundtrack to this game is wonderfully unique. It's got a very theatrical feel, a lot of horns, violins, and flutes. Despite my criminal overgeneralization, the music never feels samey or stale. Each track manages to feel fresh and distinct from the last. Like, the Wild West level has music with a lot of guitar and percussion to give the vibe of an old Western film. The Alice in Wonderland style level has a more whimsical tone with a bigger emphasis on flutes, and I even noticed a little bit of a xylophone in there for some extra whimsy. But by far, my favorite has to be the pirate levels. They have a huge focus on horns and violins, which gives it the feel of a sea shanty. Makes you really feel like a swashbuckling pirate sword fighting in the midst of a battle. Oh, could I go on a little side tangent here and mention how amazing the variety in environments and set pieces are? Whether you said no or yes, I don't care because I'm gonna do it anyway. Like, you do got the typical castle and forest level, of course, but then you got a pirate ship in the midst of a duel that's exploding and sinking as you try to escape. We got a Mexican desert town where every citizen is dressed in Mexican wrestling gear, which is kind of racist, but it's also very hilarious. In one level, you're getting blasted between two different castles in this cannon. There's a Nightmare Before Christmas style Halloween town, and plenty more that I don't want to spoil. It's great. Okay, now I think it's time that I mention the elephant in the room. The game's presentation. It's phenomenal. This isn't your typical game where the characters are actually, you know, in an actual story, if that even makes sense. Instead, in this game, it's a puppet show. You know, hence the name. Puppeteer prides itself on its entirely unique style and presentation. The entire game takes place on a single stage, and when I say entire game, I mean entire game. The gameplay, the cutscenes, the menus, the credits, all takes place on this single stage. Right here. This might sound like a stupid limitation caused by trying to make your game super special, but they actually managed to pull it off. They were somehow able to tell a captivating story with likable characters, unique settings, fun gameplay, and fantastic animation and graphics without ever moving or cutting the camera. The camera stays stationary and doesn't cut the entire time. Not during loading screens, not during cutscenes, not even when pausing. It never moves, and it's awesome. The way they pull off the cutscenes is especially interesting. In order to make cinematic cutscenes with a stationary camera, the designers had to manipulate the perspective of the sets to make it look and feel like the camera has moved. Like, there'll need to be a shot of characters overhead, so they put all the set dressing on the walls and just have the characters stand on the wall. Like, it's pretty wild how they figured this out. I get that some people might find it weird to have a whole part of this video dedicated to talking about this, but when someone gives themselves the baffling limitation of not being able to move the camera at all, you bet your bottom dollar I'm gonna talk about it. There are some parts where they take creative liberty and do things that wouldn't be possible if it was an actual puppet show, but don't worry about that part. It's still cool. So yeah, that's Puppeteer. A really cool video game with really fun gameplay, a great soundtrack, phenomenal presentation, and great writing that you should definitely check out. If you do want to play this game, it's not really that easy to acquire a legit copy anymore. It's a PS3 exclusive, so if you have one of those, you could just buy it for that, but it is on PlayStation Plus, which is how I played it. If you're a person who enjoys lesser known platformers that have unique presentations and styles, this is a perfect fit for you. Just go plop it in your PlayStation and have a grand old time if you have $100 to spare.